Our wedding was 3 days away when my perfect fiancé vanished. What I found next wasn't a clue to his whereabouts, but undeniable proof he was already a husband and father. The scent of lilies and impending rain hung in the air, a combination I used to think was the epitome of romance. Our wedding was 3 days away. 3 days. 72 hours until I walked down the aisle to marry Mark, the man who had single-handedly reassembled my faith in love. The venue was booked, a gorgeous old manor with sprawling gardens. My dress, a cascade of ivory satin and delicate lace, was hanging in my closet, practically vibrating with anticipation. Everything was perfect. Almost sickeningly so, like a scene from a movie that's just too good to be true, and I guess, in the end, it was. Mark was the kind of man you write novels about. He was a successful architect, thoughtful, funny, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. He remembered the little things, the name of my childhood dog, the fact that I hated cilantro, the way I always needed a cup of tea before I could properly function in the morning. We'd been together for 2 blissful years, and his proposal had been a surprise masterpiece involving a hot air balloon at sunrise. He was, by all accounts, flawless. The only slightly odd thing about Mark was his family. He'd always been a bit vague about them. He said his parents were intensely private and lived a quiet life up in a rural part of Washington state. He had a sister, he mentioned once, but they weren't close. I'd met his mother once over a stilted video call where she offered polite, thin-lipped smiles and didn't ask me a single personal question. Mark had brushed it off. "She's just shy, honey. She's old-fashioned. She'll warm up to you in person." I'd accepted it because I loved him and because every perfect person is allowed one small, strange quirk. His was a distant family. I could live with that. They were supposed to be flying in the day before the wedding. I was nervous but excited to finally put faces to the vague stories. The last time I saw him was Tuesday morning. He kissed me goodbye at the door of my apartment, his hand lingering on my cheek. "I have to go to the office to wrap up one last thing for the Peterson project," he'd said. "Then I'm all yours for a week of pre-wedding bliss." He smelled like coffee and his usual cologne, a scent that felt like home. "I'll call you this afternoon. I love you more than anything." I'd smiled, kissed him again, and whispered, "I love you more," as he walked to his car. I watched him drive away, a stupid, happy grin plastered on my face, never once thinking it would be the last time I'd see that car, that smile. By Tuesday evening, the first seed of worry had been planted. He hadn't called. I texted him around 5 p.m. "Hey you, still buried at work? Can't wait to see you." No reply. I called him at 7 p.m. It went straight to voicemail. That was unusual. Mark was a chronic battery checker. His phone was never dead. I told myself he was just swamped, that he'd gotten caught up and would call me the second he was free. I ate dinner alone, watching the clock. 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. I called again. Voicemail. Now the knot in my stomach wasn't worry. It was a cold, hard dread. Wednesday morning was a blur of frantic energy. I called his office first thing. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Linda, was surprised to hear from me. "Oh, Sarah, hi, Mark's not here. He took the whole week off for the wedding, remember? He finished up the Peterson project last week." My blood ran cold. He'd lied. Why would he lie about that? I tried to keep my voice steady. "Oh, right, of course. Silly me, wedding brain. Thanks, Linda." I hung up, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I called his best friend, David, his designated best man. "Hey, Dave, have you heard from Mark?" Also, there was a pause on the other end. "No, not since Monday. We were supposed to grab a beer last night, but he canceled. Said he had some last-minute wedding stuff to take care of with you. Is everything okay?" My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't with me," I stammered. "I haven't seen him since yesterday morning." I could hear the confusion and then the dawning concern in David's voice. We agreed he'd call around to the other guys and I would try Mark's apartment. I had a key, of course. I drove there in a haze, my mind racing through 100 horrible scenarios. An accident? A mugging? But his car wasn't in his designated spot. The police wouldn't file a missing persons report yet. It hadn't been long enough. I was on my own. I let myself into his apartment, my voice trembling as I called his name into the silence. "Mark, are you here?" Nothing. The place was immaculate, just as he always kept it. His laptop was on his desk, closed. A coffee mug was in the sink. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of a hasty departure. It was like he had simply evaporated. I didn't know what I was looking for. A note? A clue? Anything to explain where he'd gone. I checked his drawers, his closets under his bed. Nothing. Just clothes and books and the mundane artifacts of the life we were supposed to build together. I was about to give up, to collapse on the floor and just give in to the tears that were burning the back of my throat, when I noticed something in his walk-in closet. On the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of old sweaters, was a simple brown leather-bound box. I'd never seen it before. My fingers trembled as I pulled it down. It was heavy, solid. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my chest. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like yellowed newspaper clippings, was a photo album. It was old, the cover a deep burgundy with gold embossed lettering that had long since faded. It looked like a wedding album. His parents, maybe? I thought, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Maybe it held a clue, a family address, a phone number I didn't have. I opened it to the first page. My breath caught in my throat. It was a professional photograph, a man and a woman on their wedding day, bathed in the golden light of a setting sun. The man was Mark, younger, maybe by 5 or 6 years, but unmistakably him. His hair was a little longer, but the smile, the crinkle around his eyes, it was the same one that made my knees weak. But he wasn't standing next to me. He was standing there, beaming, with his arm around a woman who wasn't me. A beautiful woman in a wedding dress of her own, and in front of them, holding a small bouquet of flowers and smiling shyly at the camera, was a little girl with Mark's unmistakable bright blue eyes. The world tilted. My vision swam, the edges blurring as if I were looking through a warped piece of glass. My fingers, which had been trembling, went numb, and the heavy album slipped from my grasp. It hit the plush carpet with a soft, dull thud, a sound far too gentle for the cataclysmic explosion it had just set off in my life. I stared down at the open page, at the smiling face of the man I was supposed to marry, his arm wrapped possessively around another woman, another bride. The little girl. Her dress was a miniature version of the bride's. Her smile was missing a front tooth. She had his eyes. God, she had his eyes. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A prank? A cruel, elaborate joke? But the weight of the album, the faded quality of the photograph, the sheer existence of it tucked away in his closet. It all felt sickeningly real. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I knelt down, my knees cracking, and forced myself to turn the page. More pictures. Mark and this woman, this stranger cutting a tiered wedding cake. Them sharing their first dance, his eyes closed in seeming bliss. Them surrounded by a crowd of smiling, celebrating people. An entire wedding, an entire life I knew nothing about. I kept turning the pages, a masochistic compulsion driving me forward. The wedding photos gave way to honeymoon pictures, them on a beach somewhere tropical, laughing in the surf. Then photos in a cozy-looking home, a different home from the sleek, minimalist apartment I was currently standing in. There were pictures of the little girl's first birthday, a pink frosted cake smeared across her face as Mark held her up to the camera, his expression one of pure, unadulterated fatherly love. A Christmas photo, the 3 of them in matching pajamas in front of a tree. A family, a whole, complete, happy family. My fingers fumbled beneath the album, touching the brittle edges of the newspaper clippings. I pulled one out. It was a wedding announcement from a local paper, the Port Angeles Daily News. It read, Mark Peterson and Rachel Clark, both of Port Angeles, were united in marriage on June 12, 2017. 6 years ago. His last name wasn't the one he'd given me. He'd told me his name was Mark Vaughn. Even his name was a lie. I pulled out another clipping, a birth announcement. Lily Ann Peterson, born May 3, 2018, to proud parents Mark and Rachel Peterson. Lily, the lilies for our wedding, my wedding, were already at the venue, waiting. The irony was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The vague stories about his private family in Washington. Port Angeles was in Washington. The stilted video call with his mother. Who was that woman? An aunt? A paid actress? The way he never wanted me to post pictures of us on social media, claiming he was a private person. It wasn't privacy, it was concealment. My entire 2-year relationship, the proposal, the wedding planning, it had all been a lie. I wasn't his future. I was his affair. I was the other woman, and I didn't even know it. The cold dread I'd felt before was gone, replaced by a white-hot rage that started in my gut and spread through my veins like fire. The man I loved didn't exist. He was a character, a role played by a husband and father from Port Angeles named Mark Peterson. And he had vanished, not because he was hurt, but because his game was up. The wedding must have been the final curtain. He couldn't go through with it. He couldn't marry me because he was already married, so he just ran. He left me 3 days before I was supposed to become his wife, with a $1,000 dress hanging in my closet and a heart that was actively shattering in my chest. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit here in the ruins of his fake life. I scrambled for my purse, my phone feeling alien in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number he'd given me for his mother, the woman from the video call. I had to know. I had to hear her voice to see what lie she would spin now. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I even say? "Hi, you don't know me, but your son is a pathological liar who was about to illegally marry me?" My finger pressed down before I could second-guess myself. The phone rang once, twice. My heart pounded in my ears. I expected voicemail. I expected a disconnected line. I did not expect a man's voice, gruff and tired, to answer on the third ring. "Hello?" he said. It wasn't Mark. It was an older man. For a second, I was too stunned to speak. "Hello?" he repeated, a note of impatience in his voice. "Is anyone there?" "Yes," I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry to bother you. I was trying to reach Mark Vaughn's mother." There was a pause. "Mark? My son's name is Mark Peterson. There's no Vaughn here. Who is this?" My blood turned to ice. It was him, his father. The man whose face I'd just seen beaming in a photograph in the wedding album. "My name is Sarah," I said, my voice shaking but gaining a sliver of resolve. "I'm a friend of Mark's, from the city. He was supposed to meet me, and I haven't been able to reach him. I'm worried something might have happened." The man on the other end of the line sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "The city, of course. Look, Mark's fine. He came home last night unexpectedly. Said he needed a break from a big project." A break. He called me his project. The man continued, his tone softening slightly. He gets in over his head sometimes. He's sleeping now. Is it urgent?" "No," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "It's not urgent." My mind was reeling. He was there. He was safe. He was sleeping in his real home with his real family, while I was sitting in the middle of the fake life he'd built for me. I had to ask. The question clawed its way up my throat, desperate and raw. I'm his fiancé. We're supposed to be getting married on Saturday." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. When the man finally spoke, his voice was no longer gruff or tired. It was cold, sharp, and laced with a terrifying disbelief. "His fiancé? That's impossible. I don't know what kind of sick joke you're playing, lady, but my son Mark is already married. He's been married to my daughter-in-law, Rachel, for 6 years. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. He's been married to my daughter-in-law, Rachel, for 6 years. The confirmation I'd already found in the album, now spoken aloud by his own father, cemented the reality of my nightmare. The life I'd thought was mine was a phantom. The man I loved was a ghost. I was nothing more than a footnote in a story I hadn't even known was being written. I see, I stammered, my voice a strangled whisper. What else could I say? The man on the phone, Mark's father, was silent for a moment, the sound of his breathing heavy on the line. I could only imagine what was going through his mind. "Listen," he finally said, his tone shifting from cold disbelief to a grim, weary resignation. "I don't know who you are or what my son has been telling you, but it's clear you've been caught up in something ugly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." The apology felt hollow, a tiny bandage on a gaping wound, but it was more than I'd gotten from Mark. Mark had just disappeared. Is his wife there?" I asked, the question tasting like acid on my tongue. I don't know why I asked. Maybe it was a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to make all the pieces of this horror story tangible. Rachel. Yeah, she's here. She thinks he's been at a work conference all week. She has no idea. He sighed again, a sound loaded with years of what I now suspected was disappointment in his son. Look, I've got to go. I need to talk to Mark. He didn't ask for my number. He didn't promise to call back. He just wanted to end the conversation, to deal with the implosion of his family's life in private. And I couldn't blame him. Wait, I said, a sudden desperate thought striking me. Your address. Can you just tell me your address? He was hesitant. Why? I have some of his things. I need to send them back, I lied. The last thing I wanted was to pack up his belongings and mail them back like a jilted girlfriend. I wanted something else. I wasn't sure what yet. Confrontation, closure, maybe just the grim satisfaction of seeing his two worlds collide. After a long pause, he recited an address in Port Angeles. I scribbled it down on the back of an envelope with a shaking hand. Then he hung up. I sat there in the silence of Mark's fake apartment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The rage was gone, replaced by an unnerving, icy calm. The tears had stopped. My mind was suddenly terrifyingly clear. He wasn't going to get away with this. He wasn't going to just ghost me and slip back into his cozy family life, leaving me to clean up the wreckage of a wedding that was never going to happen. The next few hours were a whirlwind of methodical cancellation. I called the venue, my voice steady and detached, as I explained the wedding was off due to unforeseen circumstances. The woman on the phone was sympathetic, but the non-refundable deposit was a painful reminder of the thousands of dollars I'd just lost. I called the caterer, the florist, the photographer. With each call, a piece of the beautiful future I had envisioned crumbled into dust. I sent a short, concise email to the 100 guests who were preparing to celebrate with us. Due to personal reasons, the wedding of Sarah and Mark has been canceled. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. I didn't have the energy for individual calls, for the inevitable questions and pitying words. Then I called my maid of honor, my best friend Jessica. The moment she answered, the dam broke. The icy calm shattered, and I sobbed, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that tore through my body. Between gasps, I managed to choke out the whole sordid story, the disappearance, the apartment, the album, the phone call with his father. She was silent, listening, and when I was done, her voice was low and furious. "I'm coming over," she said. "Don't move. And Sarah? Pack a bag." When Jessica arrived, she found me sitting on the floor of Mark's closet, the damning photo album still open in front of me. She didn't offer platitudes or hugs. She just knelt beside me, looked at the photo of Mark and his smiling family and said, "That absolute son of a bitch." It was exactly what I needed to hear. She helped me pack an overnight bag, steering me out of his apartment and away from the life that had been a lie. We went back to my place, where my wedding dress hung like a beautiful, mocking ghost. Jessica took one look at it, then at me, and with a determined set to her jaw, she carefully lifted it off the hanger, zipped it into its protective bag, and laid it gently on my bed. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "We're going on a road trip," she said, her eyes flashing. "Port Angeles is a 6-hour drive. We can be there by morning." My first instinct was to say no, to hide, to curl up and let the world fade away. But then I thought of him, sleeping soundly in his bed. I thought of his wife, Rachel, who was living a lie just as I had been. She thought he was at a conference. She was about to get the shock of her life when his father confronted him, but she deserved to hear it from me. We were two women betrayed by the same man, and as much as it hurt to even think her name, we were connected by his deception. "Okay," I whispered, the decision settling in my bones. "Let's go." We left before dawn, driving north as the sky bled from black to a bruised purple. The miles disappeared beneath the tires, but the scenery did nothing to soothe the turmoil in my soul. We drove mostly in silence, the quiet punctuated only by Jessica's occasional venomous mutterings about what she'd like to do to Mark. By the time we reached the outskirts of Port Angeles, the sun was up, glinting off the water of the strait. It was a beautiful town, picturesque and peaceful. It looked like the kind of place where people build honest lives, not the kind of place that hides a man like Mark Peterson. We found the address his father had given me easily. It was a charming blue craftsman house on a tree-lined street with a well-tended garden and a child's bicycle lying on the perfectly manicured lawn. A family home. My stomach churned. This was it. This was real. Jessica parked the car across the street. "What's the plan?" she asked softly. "Do you want me to go with you?" I shook my head. "No, this is something I have to do myself." But I wasn't going to storm the door and cause a scene. Not yet. I had one more piece of the puzzle I needed to see. "There's something I need to do first. Let's find a coffee shop. I have an idea." An hour later, I was walking back down that tree-lined street alone. In my purse was my phone, and on the screen was a picture I'd found on the Port Angeles Elementary School's public website, a class photo from last year's second grade. And there, in the back row, was a little girl with a missing front tooth and her father's bright blue eyes, Lillian Peterson. The school was only a few blocks away from their house. A horrifying, brilliant, terrible idea began to form in my mind. The morning bell was about to ring, and as I stood there, across the street from the home of the man who had destroyed my life, a woman came out the front door. It was her. Rachel, the woman from the photographs. She was holding the little girl's hand, a pink backpack slung over her shoulder. They started walking down the sidewalk, heading in my direction, on their way to school. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird trapped in a cage. This was her, Rachel. In person, she was even prettier than in the photos. She had warm, kind eyes and a cascade of brown hair that caught the morning light. She was laughing at something her daughter, Lily, was saying, her head thrown back in a moment of pure, unguarded joy. They looked so normal, so happy. It was the life I thought I was days away from having. Seeing them, this living, breathing proof of Mark's betrayal, felt like swallowing shards of glass. My feet were rooted to the sidewalk. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to get back in the car with Jessica and drive until Port Angeles was just a bad memory. What was I even doing here? Was I really about to detonate a bomb in this woman's life, in this little girl's life, on a sunny Thursday morning on their way to school? The thought was monstrous. But then I saw Mark's face in Lily's smile, and the image of my wedding dress lying on my bed flashed in my mind. He didn't deserve this peaceful, idyllic life. He didn't deserve to have two women who loved him, one of whom was completely ignorant of the other's existence. Rachel deserved the truth. I wasn't sure what I deserved anymore, but it wasn't this crushing silence. I took a deep breath, the cool morning air doing nothing to calm the fire in my lungs, and I started walking towards them. My steps felt heavy, deliberate. I wasn't ambushing them. I just needed to get a little closer, to let the moment unfold as it would. They were a few houses away now, Lily skipping ahead while Rachel followed at a more leisurely pace, her eyes on her daughter. As they drew level with me, I fumbled in my purse, pretending to be looking for something. It was a cowardly move, a way to observe without being observed. "Lily, sweetie, hold on," Rachel called out, her voice gentle. "Let's wait for the light." They stopped at the corner, right beside me. I could smell her perfume, something light and floral. Lily was fidgeting with the straps of her pink backpack, humming a little tune. The domesticity of it all was a physical pain. This was my chance. My throat went dry. My mind raced, trying to find the words. "Hi, I'm the woman your husband was about to marry." "No. Excuse me, but is your husband a lying sociopath?" "Definitely not. There was no good way to do this." As if sensing my turmoil, Rachel glanced over at me. Her expression was open, friendly, the kind of polite smile you give a stranger on the street. "Morning," she said. "Good morning," I managed to reply, my voice thin and reedy. She gave me a once-over, her eyes lingering for a second on my face. A flicker of something confusion, recognition crossed her features. I looked away quickly, my gaze falling on the little girl. Lily was staring at me with those impossibly blue eyes, Mark's eyes, full of a child's unfiltered curiosity. "I like your necklace," Lily said suddenly, pointing a small finger at the delicate silver locket I always wore. The locket. Mark had given it to me on our first anniversary. My fingers instinctively went to it, the cool metal of familiar comfort that now felt like a brand. "Oh, thank you," I said, forcing a smile for the little girl. "Can you open it?" she asked, her voice bright. Before I could answer, Rachel gently chided her. "Lily, don't bother the nice lady. We have to get to school." "No, it's okay," I said quickly, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment. The universe had just handed me an opening, a terrible, perfect opportunity. My hands were shaking as I unclasped the locket. I held it in my palm, my thumb pressing the tiny catch. It sprang open. Inside were two small photos. On one side was a picture of me, smiling into the camera. On the other side was a picture of Mark, the one I'd taken of him on our trip to the coast, the wind in his hair, his eyes full of love, directed solely at me. I knelt down slightly, bringing myself closer to Lily's eye level, and held the open locket out for her to see. "It's pretty," she said, leaning in. Her eyes widened as she looked at the picture of Mark. A huge, gap-toothed grin spread across her face. "That's my daddy," she exclaimed, her voice ringing out in the quiet morning air. She looked up at her mom, her expression triumphant. "Mommy, look! This lady has a picture of Daddy!" Rachel's friendly smile faltered. The color drained from her face. She took a step closer, her gaze dropping from my face to the locket in my hand. She saw the picture of Mark. Then her eyes darted to the picture of me, right next to him. I watched the confusion in her eyes morph into a dawning, sickening horror. Her mind was clearly working, trying to connect the dots. The strange woman on her street corner, the picture of her husband in a locket with this woman, the fact that her husband was supposed to be miles away at a work conference. Her hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles white. The friendly stranger was gone, replaced by a woman staring at the wreckage of her own life. Her breath hitched. She looked at me, her eyes wide with 1,000 unspoken questions, with betrayal, with a pain so profound it mirrored my own. "Who?" she whispered, her voice trembling and barely audible. "Who are you?" I slowly stood up, my joints aching, my whole body feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I looked her directly in the eye, letting her see the devastation that I knew was reflected in my own. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't protect her from the truth any more than I could protect myself. "My name is Sarah," I said, my voice finally steady, imbued with the cold, hard certainty of a shared reality. "And until 2 days ago, I was your husband's fiancé. We were supposed to be married on Saturday." Just as the words left my mouth, the front door of the blue Craftsman house swung open. Standing on the porch, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, was Mark. He was wearing pajama pants and an old t-shirt, his hair a mess. He stretched, yawning, and then his eyes landed on us, on me, and on his wife. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His two worlds, so carefully constructed, so meticulously kept apart, had just collided on his front lawn. Time seemed to freeze. The idyllic morning scene, the chirping birds, the distant hum of traffic, the gentle breeze, all of it dissolved into a silent, high-stakes tableau. There was Mark on the porch, a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. There was Rachel beside me, her face a canvas of shattering disbelief. And there was me, the catalyst, the ghost from another life made horrifyingly real. Lily, blissfully unaware of the adult cataclysm unfolding around her, was the only one who broke the silence. "Daddy," she squealed, her voice a piercing note of innocence in the thick, toxic air. She started to run towards him, but Rachel's hand shot out, grabbing her daughter's arm with a grip that was probably tighter than she intended. Mark's eyes darted from me to his wife, then back to me. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and ghastly in the morning sun. I could see the gears turning in his head, the frantic search for an escape route, for a plausible lie that could somehow contain this mushroom cloud. But there was none. I was here. The locket was still open in my hand. His two lives were standing 10 feet apart on the same patch of grass. The game was over. "Sarah?" he breathed, my name a ghost on his lips. It was the first time he'd said my name since that Tuesday morning when he'd kissed me goodbye. Hearing it from him now, in this context, felt like a violation. Rachel made a small, wounded sound, a choked sob. She finally tore her eyes away from me and fixed them on her husband. "Mark? What is she talking about? Who is this woman?" Her voice, which had been a whisper, was now shaking with a rising tide of fury and pain. She said you were getting married." Mark took a stumbling step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture that was both pathetic and insulting. "Rachel, honey, listen, I can explain. It's not what you think." It was the classic cowardly line of a guilty man, and it hung in the air like a foul odor. "Not what I think?" Rachel's voice cracked, rising in volume. "Not what I think? A woman I've never seen before is standing on our street, holding a locket with your picture in it, telling me she's your fiancé. What am I supposed to think, Mark?" He ignored her, his panicked gaze locked on me. "Sarah, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." As if I were the one who had transgressed, as if my presence was an inconvenience, a breach of some unspoken contract of his deception. That's when my icy calm finally snapped. The raw, primal rage I'd felt in his apartment came roaring back to life. "Where should I be, Mark?" I shot back, my voice sharp and loud, startling even myself. "Should I be at home addressing wedding invitations? Should I be at our venue tasting cake samples? Or should I just be waiting patiently by the phone for the fiancé who vanished into thin air to call me back?" "Mommy, what's a fiancé?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. She looked back and forth between her parents, her brow furrowed in confusion. Rachel just squeezed her daughter's hand tighter, her knuckles white, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. "This is a misunderstanding," Mark insisted, his voice desperate. He started walking towards us down the porch steps and onto the lawn. She's a colleague from work. She's confused. Confused. He was going to try and gaslight me in front of his wife. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I let out a short, incredulous laugh that sounded more like a bark. "A colleague? Is that what you told her I was, Mark? The big project you had to run away from? Was our wedding, our 2-year relationship, just a stressful work assignment for you?" I saw the flicker of defeat in his eyes. He knew it was useless. He looked at Rachel, his expression crumbling. "Rach, I am so sorry. I messed up. I messed up so badly." Rachel pulled Lily behind her, creating a physical barrier between her daughter and her husband. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "Get back in the house, Mark," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Get in the house before you make an even bigger fool of yourself in front of the entire neighborhood." She glanced around. A curtain had twitched in the window of the house next door. "We will talk about this inside." He hesitated, looking from his wife's stony face to my own. He opened his mouth as if to say something more to me, but no words came out. Defeated, he turned and walked back into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind him with a sound of finality. Now it was just the three of us again, Rachel, Lily, and me. The silence that fell was heavier than before. Rachel took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. She knelt down to face her daughter, her movement stiff. "Lily, sweetie, I need you to go inside and watch cartoons for a little bit, okay? Mommy needs to talk to this lady." "But school?" Lily started to protest. "No school today," Rachel said, her voice softening slightly as she spoke to her child. "Go on now. Go inside." She gave Lily a gentle push towards the door. Lily, sensing the gravity in her mother's tone, obeyed without another word, casting one last curious glance at me before disappearing inside the house. Rachel stood up and faced me. The anger in her eyes was now mixed with a profound, soul-deep sadness that I recognized all too well. We were strangers, rivals by circumstance, but in that moment we were just two women staring into the same abyss, brought there by the same man. "Come inside," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "You're going to tell me everything." She turned without waiting for an answer and walked up the steps, holding the screen door open for me. My feet felt like lead, but I followed her into the charming blue house that should have been a fortress of happiness, but was now a crime scene. Inside, the house was just as I'd imagined, cozy, lived in, filled with family photos, dozens of them. On the mantelpiece, up the stairs, on the fridge, photos of Mark, Rachel, and Lily, a whole life, a real life. The evidence of my own foolishness was everywhere. Rachel led me into the living room and gestured towards a sofa. "Sit." I sat on the edge of the cushion, my back ramrod straight. She remained standing, pacing in front of the fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Start from the beginning," she said, her voice tight. When did you meet him? And so I told her. I told her everything. About how we met through a mutual friend 2 years ago. About his charm, his attentiveness, his carefully constructed lies about his name and his private family. I told her about the proposal, the wedding planning, the dress. As I spoke, her expression shifted from anger to a kind of horrified numbness. She didn't cry. She just absorbed the information, her face getting paler with every word. When I finished, the silence in the room was deafening. From the other room, we could hear the faint, cheerful sound of cartoons. Rachel finally stopped pacing and sank into the armchair opposite me, burying her face in her hands. I knew something was wrong, she whispered into her palms. The late nights at the office, the frequent business trips, the way he was so secretive with his phone. I asked him about it so many times. He always had an answer, a brilliant, believable answer. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and raw with pain. He told me he loved me. Just last week, he swore nothing was wrong. My own anger began to subside, replaced by a wave of empathy so strong it almost made me dizzy. This woman's pain was my pain. Her betrayal was my betrayal. We were on opposite sides of the same counterfeit coin. He told me the same thing, I said softly. Suddenly, a door creaked open upstairs. We both froze. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Mark appeared in the doorway of the living room. He had changed out of his pajamas and was now wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, as if getting dressed could somehow put his shattered life back in order. His eyes were red, his face haggard. He looked from me to his wife, his expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. "Rachel," he began, his voice raspy. "Sarah, we need to talk about this, all of us." Rachel shot up from her chair, her body language radiating pure rage. "There is nothing to talk about. You are a liar, Mark, a monster. You have a wife and a child. How could you do this to us? How could you do this to her?" She pointed a trembling finger at me. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." I scoffed. "You didn't mean for anyone to get hurt? You were going to marry me, Mark. What was your plan? Were you just going to have 2 wives in 2 different cities? Did you think you could keep this up forever?" His face crumpled. "I don't know," he yelled, the confession exploding out of him. "I don't know what I was thinking. I got in too deep. I love you both. I didn't know how to stop it." The sheer delusional selfishness of that statement hung in the air, more shocking than any of the lies. He loved us both, as if that excused anything, as if that made it okay. Rachel and I just stared at him, united for a moment in our shared utter disbelief. He was not just a liar, he was a coward of the highest order. Rachel slowly walked towards him, her movements eerily calm. When she was standing right in front of him, she looked up into his face. For a second, I thought she might hit him. I almost hoped she would. Instead, she spoke, her voice devoid of all emotion, a chilling, dead calm. "You need to leave, Mark," she said. "Pack a bag and get out of my house." "Rach, please," he begged, reaching for her. "Don't do this. Let's just talk." She recoiled as if his touch were fire. "There's nothing left to say. I want you gone." She then turned her head and looked directly at me, her eyes as cold and hard as stone. "And you," she said, her voice dripping with an icy venom that froze me to my seat. "You can get out, too. I don't know what you thought you'd accomplish by coming here, but you're done. Your show is over." She took a step back, gesturing towards both of us, as if we were 2 pieces of trash she was sweeping out of her life. "In fact, I want you both gone. But you're not going separately. You," she said, her gaze locking onto Mark with terrifying intensity, "are going to leave with her." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shards of glass. "You are going to leave with her." It was an edict, a judgment, a punishment for both of us. Mark and I stared at Rachel, speechless. This was a turn I hadn't anticipated. I had come for a confrontation, for the truth to be revealed, but I had never imagined being forcibly tethered to the man who had just destroyed my life. The look on Mark's face was one of pure, panicked desperation. He had lost control of both his worlds, and now the woman he had wronged the most was dictating the terms of his exile, banishing him with the very person who had caused his downfall. "Rachel, no," Mark pleaded, his voice cracking. "You can't be serious. This is our home. Lily, Don't you dare say her name, Rachel snapped, her voice like the crack of a whip. You lost the right to say her name when you bought another woman a ring. You think I want you here? Under this roof? Breathing the same air as our daughter after what you've done? You are a poison, Mark, and I'm cutting you out. She turned her cold, furious gaze back to me. I meant what I said. Get out of my house and take him with you. I felt a surge of defiance. Who was she to command me? But then I looked around the room, at the smiling family photos, at the life that was never mine, and I realized I had no ground to stand on. I was an intruder here, an unwilling accomplice in a drama I never signed up for. Staying here, arguing with her, would accomplish nothing. Fine, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I stood up from the sofa, my legs feeling shaky. I looked at Mark, this stranger who I thought I knew better than anyone. Let's go. Mark looked back and forth between us, his face a mask of disbelief. Where are we supposed to go? Rachel let out a harsh, humorless laugh. I don't know, Mark. Why don't you take her to the honeymoon suite you booked for your wedding? You've made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. With her. The cruelty in her voice was palpable. A weapon she was wielding with devastating precision. She was hurting, and she wanted us to hurt just as much. She wanted him to see me not as a secret escape, but as his new, inescapable reality, his punishment. Without another word, Rachel turned and walked out of the living room, heading towards the kitchen. We could hear the sound of a cupboard opening and closing, then the clink of glass. Mark and I were left alone, standing in the wreckage. The silence was thick with unspoken accusations and the agonizing weight of what had just happened. Sarah, He started, but I cut him off. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't say anything. Just get your things. He looked utterly broken, a man hollowed out from the inside. He nodded numbly and turned, trudging up the stairs like a man on his way to the gallows. I waited in the living room, my arms wrapped around myself, feeling exposed and strangely complicit. I could hear him upstairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing. I could still hear the faint sound of cartoons from the other room, a surreal soundtrack to the complete implosion of 3 lives. A few minutes later, he came back down, carrying a duffel bag and his wallet. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on the floor. I walked to the front door and opened it, stepping out into the morning that had started with such a terrible purpose and had now devolved into this bizarre, nightmarish exodus. He followed me out, pulling the door shut behind him. The click of the latch felt like a final severing. We walked in silence to Jessica's car, which was still parked across the street. She saw us coming, her eyes widening in shock as she saw Mark trailing behind me with a bag. I opened the back door and gestured for him to get in. He did so without a word, slumping into the seat. I got in the passenger side, and Jessica just stared at me, her mouth agape. "What the hell is going on?" she whispered. "Just drive," I said, my voice flat. "Just get us out of here." She didn't ask any more questions. She put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the charming blue house and the life it contained behind us. I didn't look back. In the rear-view mirror, I could see Mark staring out the back window, his face a mess of anguish as his home, his family, receded into the distance. Good, I thought with a viciousness that surprised me. Let him feel a fraction of what I feel. The first hour of the drive was a tomb of silence. The only sound was the hum of the engine. Jessica kept glancing at me, then at Mark in the rearview mirror, but she respected my unspoken need for quiet. Mark just sat in the back, staring blankly out the window, a ghost in the back seat. The situation was insane. What was I supposed to do with him? Drop him at a bus station? A motel? He was my problem now, a grotesque parting gift from the woman he'd betrayed. Finally, Jessica couldn't take it anymore. She pulled into a gas station. "I need coffee," she announced, shutting off the engine. "And we need to talk. What is the plan here, Sarah?" I turned to look at her, and the facade of calm I'd been maintaining crumbled. "I don't know, Jess. I have no idea. His wife kicked him out and told him he had to leave with me." Jessica's eyes widened. "She what? Wow, that is some next-level revenge right there." She looked into the back seat. Mark hadn't moved. "Well, you can't take him back to your place." "No," I agreed. The thought of him in my apartment, our apartment, was repulsive. It was Mark who finally spoke, his voice hoarse and broken. "You can just drop me anywhere. A motel, whatever. I'll figure it out." "Oh, you'll figure it out?" I snapped, twisting in my seat to face him. The anger was back, hot and sharp. Like you figured it out when you decided to lead a double life. Like you figured it out when you disappeared and left me thinking you were dead in a ditch somewhere. You don't get to just figure it out and walk away, Mark. Not this time. He flinched, but he didn't argue. He just sank further into his seat. Jessica came back with 3 coffees. She handed one to me, and then, after a moment's hesitation, passed one back to Mark. He took it, his hand trembling. We sat there sipping coffee in a gas station parking lot, 3 people trapped in the world's most awkward car ride. "You owe me answers," I said, my voice low. "Not the panicked lies you tried to spin on the lawn. The truth. All of it. Why? Why would you do this?" He was silent for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "I don't have a good answer," he said softly. "Nothing I say can justify it. When I met you, everything was complicated at home. Rachel and I, we were fighting a lot. It was a rough patch. And then I met you, and it was so easy. You were so bright and happy, and you made me feel seen. It started as an escape. I never meant for it to go so far." "An escape?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Mark, you asked me to marry you. We built a life. We were 3 days away from our wedding. That's not an escape. That's a whole other life." "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I know, I was a coward. I was living in a fantasy. I loved what we had, Sarah. I did. I loved you, but I loved Rachel too, and I couldn't bring myself to end either life, so I just kept going. Lying to everyone, lying to myself. I thought I could keep it all separate." "What was your plan for Saturday?" Jessica asked, her voice cutting and practical. "What was going to happen when you were supposed to be standing at the altar?" He shook his head, looking down at his hands. "I don't know. That's why I left. The Peterson project I told you about was a lie. I drove up to a motel halfway between here and the city. I was just going to stay there, turn my phone off, disappear. I was going to send you an email, a letter, something. I couldn't face you. I couldn't go through with it, but I couldn't bring myself to tell you why. It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done." So that was it. His grand plan was to simply vanish, leaving me with a canceled wedding and 1,000 questions. It was almost more insulting than the affair itself. He hadn't just betrayed me. He hadn't even respected me enough to give me a clean break. He was just going to ghost his own wedding. We drove on, the confession hanging in the air. We were nearing the city. The question of what to do with him became more pressing. I couldn't take him home. He had nowhere else to go. As we took the exit towards my neighborhood, an idea, cold and hard, began to form in my mind. It was born of anger and a deep, burning need for some kind of justice, some kind of restitution for the emotional and financial hell he had put me through. "Turn here," I told Jessica, pointing towards the street where Mark's apartment, his fake city apartment, was located. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Jessica asked, but she made the turn. Mark looked up from the back seat, a question in his eyes. "You can stay there," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "For now." We pulled up in front of the building. "But you're not staying for free. You lied to me for 2 years. You cost me thousands of dollars on a wedding that was a sham. You humiliated me. You broke my heart. And you are going to pay for it. Every single penny." He just stared at me. "What do you mean?" I turned to him, my expression hard as stone. "I mean you owe me. The venue deposit, the caterer, the florist, all of it. It's about $50,000, Mark. You are going to pay me back. And until you do, I'm not the only one who knows your secret." I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "I still have the address for your sister, the one you said you weren't close to, and I found your work colleagues on LinkedIn. It would be a shame if everyone, your boss, your whole family, found out that Mark Vaughn, the brilliant architect, doesn't actually exist." A flicker of a new kind of fear crossed his face, a fear not of losing his family, but of losing his reputation, his career. It was a calculated, cruel blow, and I knew it. Rachel had taken his home. I was going to take his money and his pride. "And one more thing," I added, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. "The photo album, your precious little secret. I still have it, and I found something else tucked in the back." I reached into my purse and pulled out a single folded document I'd found tucked into a flap in the back of the album. I hadn't even mentioned it to Rachel. It was a life insurance policy. It was a few years old, taken out shortly after Lily was born. Mark Peterson was the insured. The sole beneficiary wasn't his wife, Rachel. It was a name I didn't recognize. A woman named Helen Peterson. And the address listed for her wasn't in Port Angeles. It was a nursing home, just 30 minutes outside the city. Mark's face went white. Of all the revelations, all the accusations, this one seemed to hit him the hardest. The carefully constructed walls of his double life were not just crumbling. They were being systematically dismantled, brick by brick, and I was holding the sledgehammer. He stared at the folded document in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. The name Helen Peterson hung in the air between us, a new mystery in a saga already overflowing with deceit. "Who is Helen Peterson, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You told me your mother's name was Eleanor. You introduced me to a woman on a video call who you claimed was your mother." He couldn't meet my eyes. He just shook his head, a choked, guttural sound escaping his throat. "Please, Sarah, not this. Leave her out of it. Leave her out of it." My voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "You've built your entire life on a foundation of lies, and you want me to just ignore this one? This woman, Helen, is the beneficiary of your life insurance policy, not your wife, not your daughter. So I'll ask you again. Who is she?" Jessica, silent until now, turned off the car. We were parked in front of his apartment building, the engine's silence amplifying the tension inside the vehicle. She was watching Mark in the rearview mirror, her expression a mixture of disgust and fascination. Mark finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, hunted look. "She's my mother," he whispered, the admission seeming to cost him everything. "My real mother." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. "The woman on the video call," I trailed off, already knowing the answer. "My aunt," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "My mother. Helen. She has early-onset Alzheimer's. She's been in a full-time care facility for the last 4 years. She doesn't know who I am most days." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had used his own mother's tragic illness as a building block in his fabricated life. He'd erased her, replaced her with a stand-in, all to maintain his fantasy. The stilted video call, his aunt's lack of personal questions, it all made a horrifying kind of sense now. She wasn't shy or old-fashioned. She was an actress playing a part, likely fed a story about me that was as false as the one he'd fed me. "And Rachel?" I pressed, my voice cold. "Does she know? Does she visit her?" He shook his head. "Rachel and my mom, they never got along, even before she got sick. After the diagnosis, it got worse. Rachel, she couldn't handle it. The home is expensive. The policy is to make sure she's taken care of if something happens to me. Rachel doesn't know about it. It was just easier that way." Easier. The word was a slap in the face. Everything he did was for his own convenience, to make his life easier, regardless of the emotional carnage he left in his wake. He compartmentalized everything and everyone, his sick mother, his wife, his daughter, me placing us all in neat little boxes that we're never supposed to touch. "Get out of the car," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the pity he was so clearly hoping for. "Go up to the apartment. Make a list of everything you own that has any value, cars, watches, stocks, everything, and you will start liquidating it. You're going to wire me the first payment by tomorrow, $10,000, and then you're going to keep paying until you've paid back every single cent I spent on our wedding." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a puppet with his strings cut. He opened the car door and got out, pulling his duffel bag with him. He paused for a moment, his hand on the door. "Sarah, for what it's worth, I really did love you." I just stared at him, my expression unmoved. "Your version of love is worthless, Mark. Close the door." He flinched as if I'd slapped him, and with one last broken look, he shut the door and walked into the building. Jessica and I watched him go, and as soon as he was out of sight, she let out a long, low whistle. Wow, just wow. Alzheimer's? A fake mom? He has a whole other level of messed up. "Tell me about it," I said, slumping back in my seat, the adrenaline that had been coursing through me for the past 24 hours finally beginning to recede, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "So what now?" she asked gently. "Are you really going to make him stay there and pay you back?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "He's not getting off that easy. He's not just going to disappear and start over somewhere else. He's going to have to live in the middle of his mess, in the empty apartment he furnished for a life he threw away, and he's going to be reminded of what he did every single time he makes a payment to me." It was vindictive, I knew, but it felt like the only justice I was going to get. Jessica drove me back to my apartment. The place felt strange, alien. My wedding dress was still laid out on the bed where she'd put it, the ivory satin shimmering in the afternoon light. It looked like a relic from another person's life. I spent the rest of the day in a numb haze, mechanically sending out more cancellation emails and fielding the first few confused and concerned texts from friends and family. To each one, I sent the same terse reply. "The wedding is off. I'll explain later. Please respect my privacy right now." The next morning, as promised, a wire transfer for $10,000 appeared in my bank account. It was a hollow victory. The money did nothing to mend the gaping hole in my life. Later that day, a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. It was Rachel. "He's not here," it read. "His father drove him to a hotel last night. I don't know where he is. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for how I spoke to you. You didn't deserve any of this either." I stared at the message, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. A part of me was glad he was gone from her house, for her sake and for Lily's, but the other part felt a flicker of kinship with this woman. We were the two sole members of a club neither of us wanted to be in. "I'm sorry, too," I typed back, "for showing up at your door. I hope you and Lily are okay." A few minutes later, she replied, "We will be. I filed for divorce this morning." That evening, consumed by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain, I drove to the nursing home, the address from the insurance policy plugged into my GPS. It was a nice facility, clean and quiet, nestled in a leafy suburb. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just felt an inexplicable pull to see the face of the woman whose identity Mark had stolen, the real mother he had hidden away. I walked in and asked the woman at the front desk if I could see Helen Peterson. She gave me a polite smile and told me she was in the common room, in the West Wing. I followed her directions, my heart pounding with a nervous energy. The common room was filled with residents watching television or reading, and there, sitting in a wheelchair by a large window overlooking a garden, was an elderly woman with faded blue eyes, Mark's eyes. She was frail, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. I approached her slowly. "Helen?" I asked softly. She looked up at me, her expression vacant, confused. There was no recognition in her eyes. She just stared at me, a ghost of a person. My heart ached for her, for the life that had been stolen from her by a cruel disease, and for the way her son had used her absence as a cover for his own moral decay. I was about to turn and leave, feeling like an intruder, when another resident, an elderly man in a cardigan, shuffled over to us. He smiled a warm, friendly smile. "Here to see Helen?" he asked. "She's not having one of her good days today. Sometimes she doesn't know any of us." "I'm a friend of the family," I murmured. "Ah," he said, nodding. "It's always nice when her other son visits, the younger one. Such a devoted boy." I froze, my blood turning to ice. "Her other son?" The old man beamed. "Oh yes, David. He looks so much like his father did. He's here every single week without fail. In fact," he said, glancing at the clock on the wall, "he should be here any minute now." As if on cue, the doors to the common room swung open. A man walked in, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. He was tall, with a kind face and a familiar, warm smile. My world tilted for the second time in 3 days. It was David, Mark's best friend, his best man. The air in the common room suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. David, Mark's best man, the man I'd frantically called when Mark first disappeared, the one who had feigned concern and surprise. He was standing there, flowers in hand, a gentle smile on his face as he walked towards his mother. He hadn't seen me yet. My mind, already reeling from the past few days, struggled to process this new, impossible piece of information. Mark's best friend was his brother, the one he'd claimed he wasn't close to. Another lie. A deeper, more intricate deception than I could have ever imagined. He reached Helen's wheelchair and knelt beside her, placing the daisies in her lap. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, his voice full of a genuine warmth that was a stark contrast to Mark's hollow deceit. "I brought you your favorites." Helen just stared at him with the same vacant expression she'd given me. It didn't seem to deter him. He just gently patted her hand. That's when he looked up and saw me. The kind smile on his face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock, followed quickly by a wave of guilt. His face paled, and for a moment he looked exactly like his brother, a man caught in a lie. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. I just stood there, the full scope of the conspiracy finally crashing down on me. David hadn't just been a passive friend. He was an active accomplice. He knew. He must have known everything. He knew about Rachel and Lily. He knew the wedding was a sham. When I called him in a panic, his performance of ignorance wasn't just a friend covering for a buddy. It was a brother protecting his own. The beer he was supposed to have with Mark that night, it was all part of the act. "You knew," I said, my voice flat, dead. "All this time you knew." He winced, the accusation hitting its mark. He stood up slowly, looking from me to his mother and back again, as if to shield her from the ugliness of the situation. "Sarah, can we please not do this here?" he pleaded in a low voice. "Let's go outside." I followed him out of the common room and into a small, secluded courtyard. The moment the door closed behind us, I turned on him, the last of my composure shattering. "How could you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a rage that felt bottomless. "How could you let him do that to me? You stood there and helped us plan a wedding. You were going to be his best man. You were going to stand at that altar and watch him commit bigamy." David had the grace to look ashamed. He ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with turmoil. "I didn't know how to stop him," he said, his voice ragged. "I told him he was insane. I told him he was going to destroy everyone, including himself. We fought about it for months. He promised me he was going to end it with you. He kept saying he just needed more time." "More time?" I scoffed. "More time to what? Dig the hole deeper. You should have told me, David. Or you should have told Rachel. You should have done something." "It's not that simple," he shot back, a flash of defensiveness in his eyes. "He's my brother. My screw-up, pathological liar of a brother. But he's still my brother. And Rachel, she's been through enough with my mother's illness. I hoped he would come to his senses before it came to this. I never thought he would let it get to the wedding. But he did," I said, my voice breaking. "And you let him." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his complicity and my pain hanging between us. He looked exhausted, like a man who had been carrying a terrible secret for too long. "I am sorry, Sarah," he said, and unlike when Mark said it, I could hear the genuine remorse in his voice. "For my part in all of this, I am truly sorry. You are a wonderful person, and you deserved none of this." His apology, sincere as it was, didn't fix anything, but it was a crack of light in the overwhelming darkness. It was an acknowledgement of my pain from someone inside the web of lies. I left him in the courtyard and drove home in a daze. His confession was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just Mark's deception. It was a family secret, a rot that went deeper than just one man's selfishness. The days that followed were a blur of dismantling a future. I had my friends help me pack up every trace of Mark from my apartment. Every photo, every gift, every stupid little memento went into a series of cardboard boxes. I didn't throw them away. I didn't burn them. I drove them to Mark's empty city apartment, let myself in with the key I still had, and left them in a neat stack in the middle of the living room floor, a monument to his lies. I dealt with the final financial fallout from the wedding, using the money Mark had started to send me to pay off the vendors. The payments came like clockwork, large sums wired into my account with no message attached. It was blood money, but I took it. He owed me that much and more. I took the wedding dress to a charity that provides formal wear for underprivileged girls. Watching them take the beautiful gown, knowing it would make someone else's dream come true instead of representing my nightmare, was the first moment I felt something other than anger or pain. It was a tiny flicker of release. About a month later, I got an email from a lawyer. It was from Rachel's divorce attorney, asking if I would be willing to provide a statement about my relationship with Mark. I agreed without hesitation. I wrote out a detailed timeline of our 2 years together, complete with photos, receipts for the ring, and copies of wedding contracts. I sent it all, feeling a grim satisfaction in knowing that his lies would be officially, legally, on the record. Life began to find a new, quieter rhythm. The raw wound of betrayal started to scar over. I changed my number. I focused on my work, poured my energy into my friendships, and slowly, painstakingly, began to rebuild my sense of self. One rainy Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after it all imploded, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and was shocked to see Rachel standing on my doorstep, holding a large manila envelope. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "Hi," she said, her voice a little shy. "I hope this is okay. I'm in the city for a meeting with my lawyer, and I wanted to stop by." "It's okay," I said, stepping back to let her in. "Come in." She looked different. Her hair was cut shorter, and she seemed lighter. The haunted, furious look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a calm resolve. "I wanted to thank you," she said, handing me the envelope. "Your statement was incredibly helpful. The divorce is final. I got everything. The house. Full custody of Lily. He didn't even fight it." "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. "I also wanted to give you this," she said, gesturing to the envelope. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check made out to me. It was for a significant amount of money. "What is this?" I asked, confused. "It's his share from the sale of our house," she explained. "As part of the settlement, I was required to give him his half of the equity. But I don't want him to have it. After what he put us both through, it felt wrong. It's not the $50,000 you lost, I know, but it's what I can give you. I want you to have it, to start over." I was speechless. Tears welled in my eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was the gesture. An act of solidarity from the last person on earth I ever expected it from. We were two women, bound by the worst kind of betrayal, and here she was offering me a path forward. "Thank you," I whispered, the words feeling inadequate. We sat and talked for over an hour, not as rivals, but as survivors. She told me Mark had moved away, somewhere out of state, and that David was now helping her with Lily and visiting their mother regularly. She was starting over, building a new life for herself and her daughter, and I realized, sitting there with her, that I was too. Mark's story ended not with a bang, but a whimper. He paid his debt to me, the final wire transfer arriving almost a year to the day after our canceled wedding. He sent one final email with it. "It's all paid. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can find happiness." I deleted it without replying. He was a ghost from a past life, and I was done being haunted. The album, the damning evidence that had started it all, I kept. It no longer represented pain, but a strange sort of power. It was a reminder that truth, no matter how ugly, eventually comes to light. It was a testament to my own strength, a symbol of the fact that I had survived the unthinkable and come out the other side. My story didn't end at an altar with Mark, and for that, I am eternally grateful. It ended with me, whole and healed, ready to write a new chapter, one where I was the only author,